In ancient Egypt, Hebrew slaves worked tirelessly to build massive statues and monuments for the Egyptians. The Hebrews prayed to their God, begging for freedom from their suffering and asking to be delivered to the Promised Land. Fearing the growing number of Hebrews, the Pharaoh ordered his soldiers to kill every newborn Hebrew baby to prevent them from eventually taking over Egypt. One woman, Yocheved, tried to escape with her 2 children and a baby. Desperate, she placed her baby in a basket and set it afloat on the river, hoping it would keep him safe. Her daughter Miriam followed the basket from the riverbank to make sure nothing happened to her baby brother. The basket encountered many dangers on its journey, including crocodiles, hippos, and large boats that almost destroyed it. After a wild ride, the basket finally arrived at Pharaoh's palace, where Queen Tuya found it. She was surprised to see a baby inside and decided to adopt him, naming him Moses. Miriam, watching from a distance, was relieved her brother was safe and hoped he would someday return to save their people from slavery. Years passed, and Moses grew up alongside Ramses, Pharaoh's son. They often engaged in competitions like racing chariots. One day during a race, Moses playfully caused Ramses to lose control, resulting in a dramatic crash. As they raced through the village, they disrupted the construction of a temple, causing it to collapse and spill sand into the kingdom's entrance. Pharaoh was furious and blamed both Moses and Ramses for their recklessness, reminding them of the importance of tradition. Moses accepted the blame, but Pharaoh scolded Ramses, telling him that even one weak link could break a mighty dynasty. Queen Tuya calmed Pharaoh down, and he allowed Ramses to leave. Moses later tried to console Ramses, explaining that Pharaoh was hard on him because he carried the burden of upholding the dynasty. Moses also reassured Pharaoh that Ramses was capable of meeting his expectations, and they would both see him at the banquet that evening. At the banquet, Ramses complained about how his father always blamed him for everything, even when Moses was the one who started trouble. Moses teased him, saying it was because Ramses cared too much, while Ramses retorted that Moses didn't care at all. As the banquet began, Queen Tuya whispered to Ramses that he had been named Prince Regent, responsible for overseeing all the temples. She suggested he thank his father for this honor. Moses proposed that the high priests offer a tribute to Ramses in celebration, which Pharaoh accepted. The priests presented a woman named Zipporah, a Midianite slave. Ramses inspected her, but she nearly bit him in response. Seeing her rebellious spirit, Ramses offered her to Moses instead. Zipporah, however, made it clear that she wouldn't belong to either of them, as she saw them as spoiled palace brats. When Moses demanded she show respect to the prince of Egypt, she refused, saying they didn't deserve her respect. As she continued to resist, Moses caught hold of the rope binding her, and noticing the fountain behind her, he let the rope go, causing her to fall into the water. Queen Tuya was visibly disappointed in Moses for this act. Ramses, amused by the situation, ordered the guards to take Zipporah to Moses' chambers. Moses seemed uncertain about what would happen next, but Zipporah had clearly made her disdain for both of them known. Moses tries to apologize to Zipporah, but she flees. He chases after her and distracts the guards, ordering them to save a man in his room. Following her, he encounters 2 Hebrews offering her water, his long-lost siblings, Miriam and Aaron. Miriam reveals his true origins, but Moses refuses to believe it, calling it a cruel joke. Aaron pulls Miriam away, but she sings a lullaby their mother used to sing, triggering Moses' memories. He rushes back to the palace and dreams of Pharaoh ordering Hebrew infants killed. Waking up in terror, he confirms the truth from wall carvings. Pharaoh admits the killings were necessary, seeing Hebrews as a threat. Devastated, Moses confronts Queen Tuya, who reassures him that he is still their son. Meanwhile, Ramesses plans to expand the temple. On his way to see Ramesses, Moses witnesses Hebrew slaves suffering. When a guard beats a slave, Moses intervenes but accidentally kills the guard. Horrified, he decides to flee. Ramesses begs him to stay, promising to fix things, but Moses refuses, saying everything he believed was a lie. Ramesses, confused, watches as Moses tells him to ask Pharaoh for the truth before leaving Egypt behind. Moses feels lost and overwhelmed by guilt when he arrives in Midian after fleeing Egypt. He feels burdened by the weight of his past and the discovery that he is not who he thought he was. Jethro, the high priest of Midian and Zipporah's father, warmly welcomes him despite Moses' insistence that he doesn't deserve any honor. Jethro, however, sees greatness in him and tries to change Moses' perspective on life. He tells Moses that every individual has a role to play in life's grand design, whether they see it or not. His words comfort Moses, and over time, Moses begins to embrace this new life. Moses, now a member of Jethro's tribe, embraces a simpler life. He helps the tribe build a shelter and tends to Jethro's sheep alongside Zipporah. As their relationship deepens, Zipporah teaches Moses to dance, and before long, they decide to marry. Their bond strengthens over time, and Moses appears to have found peace in this new life. One morning, while Moses tends to the flock, one sheep runs off. He follows it into a cave and stumbles upon an extraordinary sight, a bush burning without being consumed by the fire. Intrigued, Moses approaches and tests the fire with his staff, but to his amazement, neither the staff nor his hand is harmed. Suddenly, a voice calls out to him, telling him to remove his sandals because he is standing on holy ground. Realizing he is in the presence of God, Moses obeys. God reveals himself as the God of Moses' ancestors and tells Moses that he has seen the suffering of the Hebrews in Egypt. He intends to deliver them from their oppression, and he has chosen Moses to lead his people out of slavery. Moses, overwhelmed and frightened, argues that he is not the right person for the job. He points out that the Hebrews will never listen to him, especially because he once lived as the prince of Egypt, the son of the man who ordered their children's deaths. God firmly commands Moses to cast aside his cowardice. He reassures Moses that he will be with him and that, if Pharaoh refuses to release the Hebrews, God will strike Egypt with his wonders. To demonstrate his power, God gives Moses a staff, which he will use to perform miracles. The encounter leaves Moses shaken, but as God's voice fades and the bush ceases to burn, he knows that his path is set. He returns to Zipporah, joyful and eager to share what he has experienced. Moses pleads with Zipporah to join him in his mission to free the Hebrew slaves, explaining that he cannot ignore the task God has given him. Initially hesitant, Zipporah is unsure of the risks they would face. However, Moses speaks of freedom for his people and reminds her that, while her family is free, many others remain enslaved. Touched by his conviction, Zipporah agrees to accompany him. After days of journeying through the desert, Moses and Zipporah reach Egypt. The sight of the exhausted, desperate Hebrew slaves fills Moses with sorrow. He enters the palace, where he is reunited with Ramesses, now Pharaoh. The two are initially overjoyed to see each other, but the mood shifts when Ramesses' priests remind him of Moses' crime. Despite this, Ramesses pardons Moses and acknowledges him as the prince of Egypt. Moses, feeling conflicted, addresses Ramesses. He tells Ramesses that things cannot be as they once were, as he now knows he is Hebrew. Moses requests that Ramesses free the Hebrew people, explaining that God has commanded him to deliver them from slavery. To prove God's power, Moses throws down his staff, which turns into a snake. Ramesses, intrigued, orders his priests to perform their own magic. They summon 2 snakes in response, demonstrating the power of their Egyptian gods. While Ramesses is entertained by the display, he is uncertain of Moses' true intentions. Moses urges Ramesses to see the suffering of the slaves, but Ramesses, blinded by his ambition, views their labor as a means to build a greater Egypt. Bound by tradition and the legacy of his father's crown, Ramesses refuses to see the suffering in the same way Moses does. Moses is heartbroken that Ramesses does not understand the bloodshed his father caused, but Ramesses cannot change his perspective. He informs Moses that he will not free the slaves and, in fact, doubles their workload. As Moses leaves the palace, Passing by the slaves, one throws mud at him in anger. Aaron, Moses' brother, confronts him, questioning why he would cause them more pain. Moses explains that he only wanted to do what God had instructed him. Aaron dismisses the notion of a caring God, accusing Moses of only caring about the slaves once he discovered he was one of them. Moses agrees, admitting that he didn't care before because he didn't want to. Miriam, Moses' sister, steps in to defend him. She reminds Moses of their long suffering as slaves and insists that God is now answering their prayers through him. She pleads with Moses not to abandon them, just as God never abandoned him. Touched by her words, Moses resolves to stay and fulfill his mission, no matter the obstacles. Moses confronts Ramses once again, urging him to free the Hebrews. Tired of his persistence, Ramses orders his guards to capture Moses, but God whispers to Moses, instructing him to use his staff. Moses places the staff into the river, turning it into blood. Ramses' priests replicate the act, further dismissing Moses' plea. Moses warns Ramses that this is just the beginning, and soon Egypt is plagued by frogs, bugs, and fire raining from the sky. Even Pharaoh's priests and guards fall victim to these horrors. As Egypt suffers, Moses begs Ramses to end the misery. He reminisces about their childhood when they played pranks together, a time when they were brothers. Ramses is unmoved, and his son questions why Moses has brought chaos to their land. Moses explains that no kingdom should be built on the backs of slaves. He pleads with Ramses to let the Hebrews go, but Ramses stubbornly refuses. Moses warns that something worse is coming if he does not relent. That night, God commands Moses to mark Hebrew homes with lamb's blood, so they may be spared as God smites the firstborn of Egypt. When Ramses' son dies in the plague, he is devastated and finally allows Moses and his people to leave. Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt toward Mount Sinai, but soon, Ramses pursues them with his army. God's intervention, in the form of fire, blocks the army, while Moses parts the Red Sea for the Hebrews to cross. As the Egyptians follow, the sea collapses on them, and the Hebrews reach safety on the other side. The Hebrews rejoice in their newfound freedom. Moses, however, looks back one last time, bidding a silent farewell to his brother, knowing they will never meet again. Zipporah reminds Moses that he has completed God's impossible task, leading his people to freedom. Moses watches over his people from the top of Mount Sinai, holding the stone tablets with the 10 Commandments, ready to guide them into their new life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more. See you in the next one.